She stood in the great hall of Thornwood, her wedding gown still crisp with new silk, her veil still trailing from her hair, and felt the weight of 100 cold candles pressing down on her. The ceremony had ended 3 hours ago. The guests had gone. The servants had retreated. And now, in a house that was supposed to become her home, her husband of 3 hours looked past her shoulder as if she were a ghost and spoke words that split the evening in two. "You will have a separate chamber, madam. This marriage is nothing but a truce. I expect you to conduct yourself with dignity, and I will do the same. Beyond that, we owe each other very little." Alara Vance, now the Duchess of Thornwood, felt the breath freeze in her lungs. She had prepared herself for a cold marriage. She had known that Alexander Blackwood, the Duke of Thornwood, had agreed to this union only because the king had demanded an end to the bitter feud between their families. She had been a bargaining piece, a signature on a treaty. But standing there, still wearing the gown her mother had wept over with joy, she had allowed herself one fragile hope. Hope that perhaps over time there might be kindness. Perhaps, if she tried hard enough, there might be warmth. That hope shattered with a single sentence. Alexander did not wait for her reply. He turned, his black evening coat swallowing the candlelight, and walked toward the grand staircase without a backward glance. His footsteps echoed on the marble, each one a small, tidy stab wound. Alara stayed rooted to the floor, her gloved hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles ached beneath the silk. A maid appeared silently, head bowed, and led her to a beautiful bedroom in the east wing. It was elegant, perfectly appointed, and utterly lonely. The maid curtsied and left. The door clicked shut. Alara sat on the edge of the vast canopied bed, still in her wedding dress, and did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears changed nothing. Instead, she pressed her palm against the cold embroidery of the coverlet and whispered into the silence, "A truce, then. So be it." That was the beginning of her pain. For the first month, Alara tried to be a wife. She rose early, dressed with care, and made certain she was present at the breakfast table before her husband. He was always there already, reading a newspaper, a cup of black coffee at his elbow. He would nod politely, murmur some distant pleasantry about the weather, and then retreat to his study. The toast would grow cold on her plate while she listened to the ticking of the tall clock in the corner. She attempted to learn the household. She consulted the housekeeper, Mrs. Pretty, about menus and linens. She asked the steward about the tenants. She requested a tour of the estate, hoping that perhaps the Duke would accompany her. He sent a groom instead. Every small bridge she tried to build, he dismantled with polite, unshakable indifference. One afternoon, she gathered her courage and knocked on the heavy oak door of his study. She carried a tray of tea, prepared exactly the way his valet had mentioned he preferred. She had rehearsed a gentle offer to sit with him, to listen if he wished to talk, to be a quiet presence if he wished for silence. When the door opened, he stood framed in the dark richness of the room, shelves of leather-bound books rising behind him like fortress walls. His gray eyes, the color of winter clouds, flicked to the tray with something almost like irritation. "I do not take tea in the afternoon," he said. I thought you might enjoy some company," she managed, her voice smaller than she intended. "I do not require company, thank you," and the door closed, gentle and final. Alara carried the tray back to the kitchen, her cheeks burning. The servants said nothing, but she felt their pity like a damp shawl around her shoulders. That evening, she stood at her bedroom window and watched the last light drain from the sky over the deer park. She realized with a hollow ache that she had been waiting for love that would never come. The hope she had nurtured began to shrink, curling in on itself like a leaf in frost. A week later, she discovered the portrait. She had been exploring the gallery, a long, hushed corridor where generations of Blackwoods gazed down from gilded frames. At the far end, near a window seat draped in velvet, she found a smaller painting, half hidden by a heavy curtain. It showed a young woman with soft brown hair and a smile that held secret joy. Her eyes were lively, full of mischief, and her gown was the pale rose of early summer. She looked nothing like the stern ancestors on the other walls. She looked loved. Alara reached out, her fingertips almost brushing the painted cheek, when a sharp voice cracked through the silence. "Do not touch that." She spun. Alexander stood at the end of the gallery, his face harder than she had ever seen it. He strode toward her, not quickly but with an intensity that made her heart pound. He gently but firmly drew the curtain back across the portrait, concealing the smiling girl. "That room is private," he said, his voice low and tight. "You are not to come here again." "I meant no harm," she whispered. I did not know." "Now you do." He looked at her then, and for the first time she saw something beneath the ice. It was not anger exactly. It was a raw, unhealed grief that flickered in his gray eyes before he masked it again. "Please return to the main house." She fled, her slippers silent on the runner. Back in her room, she sat trembling, her mind turning over the image of that lovely, unknown face. He had protected that portrait with the ferocity of a man guarding a sacred memory. A lost love, she thought. The woman he truly loved. The woman he could not have, which was why he could never open his heart to his political bride. The explanation settled into her chest, cold and heavy as a stone. From that day, Alara began to let go. She stopped appearing at the breakfast table. She no longer sought him out for conversation. She no longer asked the steward when the Duke would be home. Instead, she turned her quiet intelligence toward the estate itself. She walked down to the village, a cluster of stone cottages nestled in the valley, and introduced herself not as the Duchess but simply as Alara. She listened to the tenants' worries, noted the leaking roofs, the ailing livestock, the children who needed better schooling. She began keeping a small journal, filling it with careful observations and gentle plans. With Mrs. Pretty's hesitant blessing, she reorganized the still room, restocking herbs and remedies. She visited the sick, carrying baskets of broth and fresh bread. She taught a few of the village girls to read, sitting with them in the vicar's garden while the summer light turned the leaves to gold. The gratitude she received was not grand or dramatic. It was the quiet warmth of people who had been overlooked for too long, and it soothed something cracked inside her. The servants noticed the change. "Her Grace has a way about her," the groom said to the cook. "Quiet, but she sees everything." The housekeeper, who had served the Blackwood family for 30 years, began to leave small bouquets of lavender in the Duchess's sitting room. It was their silent language of appreciation. Alexander noticed nothing at first. He was away in London for several weeks, attending Parliament and burying himself in political maneuvering. When he returned, autumn was sharpening the air, and the beech trees along the drive had turned to copper. He rode up to Thornwood Hall expecting the same heavy, resentful silence he had left behind. Instead, he found the house humming with a strange new energy. A footman smiled as he took his hat. A maid hummed while dusting the hall. In the drawing room, a vase of fresh chrysanthemums stood on the mantel, arranged with an artful simplicity. He paused, frowning. "Who did this?" he asked. "Her Grace, your lordship," the butler replied. "She has made several changes while you were away." Changes? The word unsettled him. He walked through the house with a vague sense of intrusion, as if his own home had shifted slightly out of focus. He found his wife in the conservatory, bent over a tray of seedlings, her hair escaping its pins and a smudge of soil on her cheek. She looked up when she heard his footsteps and rose with a calm, polite smile that did not reach her eyes. "Your Grace," she said, "I trust your journey was pleasant." She had never called him Your Grace in private before. The formality struck him like a slap. He searched her face for the eager, hopeful light that had once flickered there, but it was gone, replaced by a serene distance. She looked well, he realized, vibrant even, but her warmth was no longer directed at him. "I see you have been busy," he said, and his voice came out harsher than he intended. "The conservatory was neglected. I thought it a shame to waste good soil." She wiped her hands on her apron, a practical gesture that seemed entirely unlike the timid bride he remembered. "Was there something you required, Your Grace?" Require, a word from a servant. He felt a flush of irritation rise in his chest. "No," he said curtly, "nothing at all." He turned and left, but the image of her standing among the green shoots, perfectly composed and utterly indifferent, stayed with him all evening. That night, he dined alone for the first time in weeks, and he found the silence of the long table grating in a way it never had before. The next Sunday, he saw her with another man. He had ridden out to inspect the tenant cottages after hearing reports of a fever outbreak. As he approached the village green, he heard laughter, bright and unguarded. He reined in his horse near the old oak tree and saw Alara sitting on a wooden bench, a cup of tea in her hands, her head tilted back in genuine amusement. Beside her sat a tall, sandy-haired man in the plain coat of a country physician. The man was speaking animatedly, gesturing toward the vicarage, and Alara was laughing, really laughing, the sound like water over smooth stones. Something hot and sharp twisted in Alexander's chest. He watched for a full minute unseen, as the physician leaned closer to show her something in a leather notebook. Their heads were nearly touching. The easy familiarity between them was unmistakable, a friendship woven from shared time and trust. Alexander's hands tightened on the reins. He rode forward, his horse's hooves loud on the packed earth. Alara looked up and her laughter faded. Not abruptly, not guiltily, but simply because her attention had shifted. The man beside her rose politely and bowed. "Your Grace," the physician said. "Dr. Julian Thorne at your service. I've been treating the fever cases in the village. Your wife has been an invaluable help." Invaluable. The word grated. Alexander dismounted and gave a curt nod. "I was not aware we had called for a physician from outside." Alara answered smoothly. "Dr. Thorne was passing through on his way to Bath. He heard of the outbreak and offered his assistance. I accepted." There was no apology in her tone, no request for permission. She was informing him, not seeking approval. The change was so profound that Alexander found himself momentarily speechless. Julian Thorne looked between them, sensing the undercurrent, and quietly excused himself to check on a patient. "You seem very familiar with the man," Alexander said once they were alone, the words laced with an acid he did not fully understand. Alara met his gaze evenly. "He is a childhood friend. I have known him since I was a girl. I did not know he would be here, but I am glad of his company. He has been a great comfort." Comfort? The word pierced him. He had never given her comfort. He had never offered her anything but walls. He opened his mouth to say something, some cold remark about propriety, but the look in her eyes stopped him. There was no defiance there, no challenge. Only a quiet, sad acceptance that made him feel suddenly, terribly ashamed. He mounted his horse and rode away without another word. That night, he sat in his study and stared at the curtain that hid his sister's portrait. He did not draw it back. He was afraid, in some dim way, of what Lillian's painted smile might accuse him of. The days that followed were a slow, agonizing education in regret. Alexander began to watch his wife, not with suspicion, but with a hunger he could not name. He noticed how the servants brightened when she entered a room. He heard the tenants speak of her with genuine affection, calling her the heart of Thornwood. He saw the small ways she had woven herself into the fabric of the estate, not through grand gestures but through quiet, relentless kindness. He also saw the void she had left around him. She no longer sought him out. She no longer lingered in doorways hopping for a word. When they passed in the corridor, she smiled politely and continued on her way. At dinner, which she now attended only occasionally, she made conversation about estate matters with the ease of a business partner. The warmth she gave to others, the laughter she shared with Dr. Thorne on his weekly visits, was something he had never earned. One afternoon, he overheard two maids talking in the linen room. "Her Grace gave her own brooch to the blacksmith's wife," one said in a hushed, wondering voice. "Said to sell it for medicine when the little one took ill. Aye, and she never told his lordship, just did it quiet like it were nothing." Alexander stood frozen in the hallway, her brooch, the sapphire one she had worn on her wedding day, a gift from her mother. She had sold it to buy medicine for a tenant's child, and he had not known. He had not been present enough to know. That evening, he sought her out. She was in the small sitting room she had claimed as her own, a book open on her lap and a fire crackling softly in the grate. She looked up with mild surprise when he entered. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "I heard about the brooch," he said, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. "You should not have had to sell your own belongings. The estate has funds for such things. You only needed to ask." She closed her book gently. "I did ask, Your Grace. 3 months ago, I sent a note to your steward requesting a small sum for the village dispensary. The note was returned with a message that you had not authorized any additional expenditure." The blood drained from his face. He remembered the note. He had been buried in political correspondence and had scrawled a dismissive "not now" across the bottom, never giving it another thought. She had not pressed the matter. She had simply taken the jewels from her own body and solved the problem herself. "Ilara," he began, but her name felt strange on his tongue, too intimate for the distance between them. She rose, her posture calm and untouchable. "It is done, Your Grace. The child is recovering. That is all that matters." She left the room, and he stood there, hollowed out by a guilt so profound it robbed him of breath. The breaking point came on a rain-lashed evening in late autumn. Alexander had been avoiding his study, haunted by the portrait behind the curtain, but a forgotten document drew him there after dark. He pushed open the door and found Ilara already inside. She was standing before the hidden portrait, the curtain drawn back, a single candle in her hand. Her face was wet with tears. She turned when she heard him, and this time she did not flinch. "I am sorry," she said, her voice thick but steady. "I know I should not be here, but I had to see her again. I had to understand what I could never be." The words hit him like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "The woman you love." Ilara gestured toward the painted smile. "You have kept her locked away in your heart, and there has never been room for me. I thought if I could just see her, perhaps I could learn to accept it. But I cannot. I cannot spend my life as a shadow in your house, Alexander. I am tired of being invisible." A tremor ran through him. "Ilara, that portrait, she is not." "Please do not explain." She set the candle down with a hand that shook only slightly. "I know you did not choose me. I know I was forced upon you as a condition of peace. But I am a person. I have a heart. And I cannot keep breaking it against the walls you have built." He reached for her, but she stepped back, and the distance between them felt like a chasm carved into the floor. "I want a separation," she said. "I will go to my family's dower house in Somerset. You may tell society whatever you wish. I will not fight you. I just want to live somewhere I am not a constant disappointment." The word separation crashed through him like a thunderclap. His mind reeled. He saw with terrible clarity the empty house, the silent gardens, the table set for one. He saw her walking away, her quiet strength leaving his life forever, and he knew in that moment that he could not bear it. "No," he said, and the word came out raw and desperate. "Ilara, you cannot leave, not before you know the truth." She looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. What truth could possibly change anything? He moved past her and drew the curtain fully aside, letting the candlelight wash over the portrait. "Her name was Lillian," he said, and his voice cracked on the name like thin ice. "She was my sister. She died when she was 19 during the fever outbreak that swept through our old estate. We had lost everything because of the feud, because of a financial ruin I believed your father had caused. She was already weak, and the damp, cold cottage we were forced into, it killed her. I blamed your family. I blamed you." Ilara stared at him, her lips parted. The candle flame trembled, casting dancing shadows across his anguished face. "All these years," he continued, "I have been drowning in grief and misplaced rage. I married you to end the feud, yes, but I also married you with a heart full of resentment. I convinced myself you were a symbol of everything I had lost, and I punished you for a crime you never committed." She stepped closer, her expression shifting from shock to something guarded. You never told me. You let me believe you were in love with a ghost, that I was merely an obligation. I know." His voice was barely a whisper. "I was a coward. I did not know how to face my own pain, so I buried it in cruelty toward you. But I swear to you, Alara, I have not been blind these past weeks. I have seen the woman you are, the kindness you have poured into this estate, the love you have given to people who were strangers, and I have realized that I have been loving you for longer than I have had the courage to admit." She shook her head slowly, fresh tears spilling over. "You do not get to say that now. Not when I have finally found the strength to let you go. You do not get to ask me to stay because you have suddenly woken up to what you are losing." He sank to his knees. The mighty Duke of Thornwood, the man who had built walls of ice around his heart, knelt on the cold floor of his study before his wife. "I am not asking you to stay because of what I am losing," he said, his voice breaking into pieces. "I am begging you to stay because of what I have found. You, Alara, you are what I have found, and I know I do not deserve your forgiveness. I know I have years of coldness to atone for, but please, please give me a chance to try." She looked down at him, and the battle on her face was written in every trembling line. Hope and fear, longing and self-preservation, all waged war behind her eyes. Before she could speak, the sound of shattering glass tore through the room. The window behind the desk exploded inward, and a figure cloaked in darkness tumbled through, a pistol glinting in the candlelight. Sir Reginald Croft, the man who had orchestrated the original financial ruin, who had fed lies to both families to cover his own crimes, stood wild-eyed and desperate. His scheme had begun to unravel. Alara's quiet inquiries into the past had stirred old ghosts. He had come to silence the truth forever. "You meddling fools," he snarled, the pistol swinging toward Alara. "You should have let the dead stay buried." Time slowed. Alexander surged up from his knees, every instinct igniting with a single blazing imperative: protect her. He threw himself between Alara and the weapon just as the shot rang out. The ball grazed his shoulder, a searing line of fire, but he did not stop. He drove his full weight into Sir Reginald, sending them both crashing to the floor. The pistol skittered away. Footmen burst through the door, summoned by the noise, and within moments Sir Reginald was subdued and dragged away, screaming oaths into the storm. Alara was at Alexander's side in an instant, her hands pressing against the blood seeping through his coat sleeve. "You foolish, foolish man," she wept, her fingers trembling. "You could have been killed." He looked up at her, his gray eyes soft despite the pain. "You are worth any risk," he said. "You have always been worth everything." She helped him to a chair, and while the household scrambled for bandages and a physician, she knelt beside him, her tears falling onto his hand. The walls between them, built stone by stone over a year of silence, finally began to crumble. He reached up with his good arm and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away the wetness. "I am so sorry," he whispered, "for every cold word, every moment I made you feel unwanted. You are the heart of this house. You are the heart of me." She covered his hand with her own. "I was so afraid to trust you again," she said. "I tried so hard to stop loving you, and I could not. Even when I walked away, I was still walking toward you in my heart." The confession hung between them, tender and raw. He pulled her gently closer, and she let herself be held, her ear pressed to his uninjured shoulder, the steady beat of his heart, a promise she had long stopped hoping to hear. The weeks that followed were a slow, deliberate healing. Dr. Julian Thunna tended Alexander's wound and, with the gentle wisdom of an old friend, assured Alara that the injury would mend completely. Before he left, he took her hand and said quietly, "He is a man who has learned the cost of pride. Give him the chance to prove he has changed." She nodded, and some of the fear in her chest loosened its grip. The truth about the past was brought into the light. Letters found in a hidden compartment of Sir Reginald's London residence proved beyond doubt that Alara's father had been innocent, that he had tried desperately to warn the late Duke of the impending ruin. The revelation was published discreetly, clearing her family's name. Alexander gathered every member of the household, from the steward to the scullery maid, and publicly acknowledged the wrong done to his wife. He did not hide his shame, and in that humility the estate saw the birth of a different kind of duke. But the most important transformation happened in the quiet moments. In the mornings, when Alexander began joining Alara for breakfast, not out of duty, but because he could not bear to start the day without her smile. In the afternoons, when they walked the estate together, his hand resting at the small of her back in a gesture of quiet possession and devotion. In the evenings, when they sat before the fire and talked, truly talked, about Luluan, about grief, about the years they had lost and the ones they hoped to build. One evening in early spring, when the crocuses had pushed through the frost and the deer park was misted with green, Alexander led Alara to the conservatory. The seedlings she had planted months ago had grown into tender shoots, reaching toward the glass ceiling. He stopped beside a small bench and took both her hands in his. "I once told you our marriage was nothing but a truce," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I have never been more wrong about anything in my life. You are not a truce, Alara. You are my peace. You are my home." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "And you are mine," she said, "even when I tried to deny it." He kissed her then, soft and reverent, a kiss that tasted of spring rain and new beginnings. When they drew apart, he kept her hand pressed to his heart. "I have a gift for you," he said. "Close your eyes." She obeyed, a small smile playing on her lips. When she opened them again, he was holding the sapphire brooch she had sold all those months ago. He had traced it through 3 different buyers to bring it back. "You should never have had to give this away," he said, "but I wanted you to have it again as a symbol, not of what you lost, but of what you gave. Your heart, Alara, you gave your heart to everyone in this place, and I am the most undeserving recipient of all." She pinned the brooch to her bodice with fingers that trembled only slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for bringing it back, for bringing us back." They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by growing things, and the last shadow of the past slipped away into the dusk. A year later, on a morning heavy with the scent of roses, Alara sat on a blanket beneath the old oak tree on the village green. A basket of bread and cheese waited beside her, but her hands were occupied with the small, swaddled bundle in her arms. The baby's eyes, the same winter gray as his father's, blinked up at the dappled sunlight with solemn wonder. Alexander approached with 2 cups of cider, his stride still carrying the confident ease of the Duke, but his face had softened in ways that only love could carve. He settled beside his wife and gazed at the tiny face peering from the blanket. "He has your stubborn chin," Alara said, smiling. "And your generous heart, I hope," Alexander replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. The villagers, going about their day, smiled at the sight of the Duke and Duchess sitting among them like ordinary people, their child cradled between them. The past had been acknowledged, mourned, and laid to rest. The future stretched ahead, not as a truce, but as a promise. Alara leaned her head against Alexander's shoulder. "Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding night?" He winced. "I remember, and I wish every day that I could take it back." "Don't," she said softly. "If not for that pain, I might never have found my own strength, and you might never have found your heart." He tightened his arm around her. "I loved you too late," he said, echoing a regret that still lingered at the edges of his thoughts. "But I will spend every remaining day loving you early, often, and without reservation." The baby gurgled, a tiny hand escaping the blanket to grasp his father's finger. Alexander looked at the small, perfect grip and felt a gratitude so vast it nearly stole his voice. In the end, their love was not a sudden, sweeping storm. It was a slow sunrise after a long, cold night. It was the quiet mending of 2 wounded souls who had learned, through pain and distance and the sharp ache of regret, that home is not a place. Home is the person who sees your shadows and chooses to stay. And as the bells of the village church rang the hour, sweet and clear across the valley, Alara closed her eyes and let the warmth of the moment sink into her bones. She had stopped seeking love. She had found herself instead. And in doing so, she had been found by the very love she had once thought impossible. The healing was complete. The story, soft and luminous, settled into its final, peaceful line.